Joining us live from Canberra is the Daily Telegraph national political editor John Rolfe and political reporter at the Australian newspaper Richard Ferguson. Good to see you both. Thank you. Another busy morning there in the nation's capital, I see. The cabinet reshuffle, of course, making big news this morning. John Rolfe, probably the worst kept secret that David Littleproud would go into the agriculture portfolio, which, it's got to be said, has been something of a revolving door portfolio in recent times.
Well, that's right. He's going back to it. But he's also held on to emergency management, which I think is one of the storylines here. The PM really wants to present a picture of continuity, that there's not too much that's being changed. Otherwise, it looks like what's gone on in the Nats is really causing major ructions for the coalition. So by keeping him in that role of emergency management and also giving him a role that he's had before, he's able to say that, well, there's not too much to see here.
Richard, what is the reaction there in Canberra after the news about Keith Pitt? He's been installed into cabinet from the backbench. He's a well-known big supporter of nuclear power, which of course was a highlight in that Prime Ministerial news conference a little bit earlier today. Of course, the fit with this new resources portfolio means that he's likely to be asked a number of times where he's standing on that issue now that he holds that position in cabinet.
Well, I think it's the most extraordinary elevation for Keith Pitt. He really is the big winner because, you know, as you said, from the backbench to cabinet, it's not a bad way to go. So, and yes, he is a big advocate of nuclear energy and he will be asked about that constantly. What he'll also be asked about constantly is the fact that he now has to balance water resources and resources, mining basically, you know, two areas that often conflict with each other and often kept separate. He's going to have to deal with them. Scott Morrison and Michael McCormack both said they had confidence in him, but as my colleague Greg Brown said a little earlier on Sky News, you couldn't help but feel that maybe David Littleproud would be glad to give up water resources. It really has been the trickiest portfolio, especially in recent months with the Murray-Darling Basin. So gosh knows that Keith Pitt has a lot on his hands for somebody who was a backbencher only a few hours ago.
Yeah, I spoke with Darren Chesters a bit earlier in the program and he was adamant that the elevation of Keith Pitt from the backbench to cabinet wasn't anything to do with a sweetener deal from Michael McCormack to get Keith Pitt's vote on Tuesday. No, there wouldn't be any link there, I'm sure. John Rolfe, it is a good point, though, that walking that tightrope between water and resources is going to be a tricky one.
Well, that's true, but it's hardly unprecedented. I mean, in the state that I'm from, New South Wales, you have in one role both the environment and energy. So you can have these conflicting roles together, but it will make life more difficult for Keith Pitt. It will put him in awkward positions at times and having to further justify his position when he makes a decision on or advocates for a particular matter. So that's certainly going to be tricky. And on your point, Ashley, there regarding what Darren Chesters had said earlier, of course not. I mean, to my mind, what was revealed by this reshuffle was just how close Barnaby Joyce came to winning on Tuesday morning in the spill, because there's a reward here for everyone. It shows that Michael McCormack really has had to share the spoils to shore up his support ahead of the spill.
Absolutely, and Michael McCormack pretty much put on notice now that he needs to be more assertive and really step up in terms of making the case for the Nats around that cabinet table and to the Prime Minister. In terms of the people who have been demoted, obviously Bridget McKenzie, Michael McCormack already saying, well, she'll be rehabilitated, there'll be a return to the front bench down the track. Matt Canavan, he's not being so complimentary about him at this stage. Do you expect, Richard, that Matt Canavan is going to be the sort of noisy, unhelpful backbencher, you know, of types we've seen in the past, or do you expect he might also be playing nice with an eye to the future of a future elevation again?
I'm not sure whether he'll be noisy or whether he'll be quiet, Ashley, but I have no doubt that he is a dangerous person to have outside the ministry. He is very clever. He understands, especially the Nationals electorate in regional Queensland, which, you know, partly helped the government survive last year, and that still, you know, shocking election result. And, you know, he has a lot of contacts. He has a lot of supporters in the resources industry and throughout the Nationals Party, and he is a big force, and he will continue to be a big force. And Michael McCormack may come to rue the day where he didn't let him back in cabinet, but we'll see how it goes.
I think you'll be noisy. I think that you... I think you're going to see him playing a sort of a Ron Boswell type role here, where he's going to rove across a range of issues and really try and help make the Nationals appear like they're more in the conversation and dragging the government in their direction. So I think he's going to see himself and enjoy this newfound freedom, although it must be said that had he not resigned his role ahead of the spill, perhaps Barnaby Joyce would have won, perhaps Michael McCormack wouldn't have had that role as part of the spoils which he could distribute amongst those who he could win over to his side.
You can see why McCormack supporters are making a bit of this idea that the Nationals need to adopt that need for a two-third majority in any future Nationals leadership spill. Darren Chesters earlier on the program was saying he does think that this deserves to be looked at, that the situation as it is isn't the greatest in terms of stability going forward. And look, we've seen this revolving door of leadership now for many years, and we know that can be a problem. So we'll see where the Nats land on that. I do just want to get your take as well on the bushfire politics, which are continuing this week, of course. We've learned a bit more about the terms of reference for the Bushfire Royal Commission, a real focus on hazard reduction as well as climate change to be examined in that Royal Commission. The Prime Minister saying yesterday he's not going to be bullied into taking more action on climate change, but really labouring the point that Mr Morrison is saying he thinks hazard reduction is at least as important as reducing emissions, and that both angles really need to be considered. John, would you expect today another attack from Labor when it comes to the bushfire politics at the moment in question time?
Oh, definitely. I think that Labor thinks they're on a winner here because whatever the Prime Minister says, it tends to tick off someone on this subject, because if he's talking up hazard reduction, that gets the moderates offside, whereas if he says anything that suggests that they might be willing to go further on climate change, well, that gets the Conservative part of the party their noses out of joint. So it's very tricky, very difficult, and we saw those tensions flare in the party room earlier this week. So it's the great balancing act that the PM must perform. He wants to ensure that this Royal Commission doesn't just look at climate change, but I think the words he used this morning in his press conference was resilience and adaptation, and that they're at least as important. So I think that we'll continue to see him try and divide pretty much equally between talking about how we're going to have hotter, longer summers, and that he's recognising that climate change is real, and that we need to adapt and become more resilient to that, because that plays well within a section of his party.
Interesting to see some analysis out today from the University of Melbourne suggesting that while hazard reduction certainly is helpful for less intense fires, when it comes to these more severe fires that we saw over the summer, that they certainly weren't as effective in terms of the hazard reduction angle. But Richard, in terms of the politics more broadly on this issue, of course climate change and hazard reduction had to be in the terms of reference for the Bushfire Royal Commission, or there would have just been a massive outcry from pretty much all sections of the Parliament.
Oh, well, absolutely, and I think it is fair, if it is a wide-ranging Royal Commission, that it does look at everything. I think John is also right that Labour is definitely going to pursue it, although interestingly Labour has not gone out of their way to attack the Prime Minister on hazard reduction, although Anthony Albanese has made the point of, he thinks that obviously, as that university report says, because of the longer, hotter, more intense summers, hazard reduction isn't as useful a tool, according to some, than perhaps it was when the climate was cooler. But he's also said he wants more resources for hazard reduction. So Labour isn't pushing that divide too much, but it's very much about Scott Morrison's, unwillingness to meet with former fire chiefs. They haven't mentioned the holiday to Hawaii yet, but it does seem to be going in that direction. And it'll be interesting today to see if they just keep on bushfires, because yesterday they went from bushfires to the Nationals leadership to sports rorts, and there was a lot of messages in one. It'll be interesting to see if they're going to focus that message a bit more as the sports rort scandal dies down.
Yeah, you think they might fine-tune that this afternoon in question time. We will wait and watch. Of course, it'll be live here on Sky News in just over an hour. Richard Ferguson, John Rolfe, appreciate your insights with us on Newsday this afternoon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.